Hello everyone, bienvenue. Je suis Josipa Petronic, la présidente et directrice de CUTRIC. I'm Josipa Petronic, the president and CEO of the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. I'm joining you virtually today from St. Catharines in Ontario, and I'd like to acknowledge that here my surroundings encompass the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. This does remind us that our great standard of living in Canada is directly related to the economic and environmental stewardship of the Indigenous peoples across the centuries and across Canada. Merci and thank you for joining our third annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference. This past year has no doubt been an extraordinary one. It's been extraordinary in the sense of human devastation, but it's also been extraordinary in the sense of human perseverance and overcoming of a deathly virus through technology and innovation. It is positive. It's a positive theme of human virtue in the face of pain. I've been vaccinated once and I'm waiting for my second dose. And I find that this is a wonderful context in which to talk about technological creativity and urgency in the pursuit of a better future. But, and it is a big but, today, we are also in the midst of a profound social dialogue about who gets vaccinated first, why mostly white, rich world country citizens like me get vaccinated first in line, where others get shoved to the back of the line with the implication that their lives are worth less than ours. And this global hand-wringing over the social disparities in vaccination is a learning opportunity for us because it reflects 100% the social disparities that have defined our society and our transit systems since the inception of this country. Specifically, we all know that there are disparities in accessing a good quality of life, and that as Canadians, we know this has been a problem for many of our fellow citizens since their birth or since their immigration to Canada. Last year, at this time, I was here joining you virtually, opening this very same conference, our second annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference, and our first fully digital event, in the midst of the shame and the personal soul searching that came with those words, "I cannot breathe." And our fundamental recognition at that time, and still today, that sometimes, and especially if we're colored, police forces do not always protect us, they harm us. Then in November, a few months later, I opened our Smart Rail conference, a positive look forward to the movement of rail mobility in Canada. But it was in the wake of the horrific tears of pain and pain recorded by our fellow Canadian Joyce Echequan, a mother of multiple young children who needed their mom to come home safe and healthy from the hospital. But instead she came home in a coffin, because Joyce had to record herself in a Quebec hospital as she lay dying, with nurses and medical staff belittling her and telling her she was worth so little that they would not take her pain seriously or save her. At CUTRIC, every day, we try to focus on environmental technologies, the kinds of technologies that are going to save our planet through transportation innovation. Things like electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses and autonomous shuttles and big data for transit and mobility. All of this sounds really tech savvy and it sounds technocratic, as though we should be able to do transit technology in a bubble without having to deal with the messiness of social and political reality. But that's like saying politics should never enter sports dialogues either. And if we all remember a few years ago when Colin Kaepernick took a knee at a football game in protest, there were loads of fans criticizing him for politicizing sports. But sports is fundamentally political. The corporations that run it, the taxes they pay, the jurisdictions they're allowed to operate in, the jurisdictions they're not allowed to operate in, these are political decisions because politics is about the distribution of resources. It's about who gets resources and who doesn't, and who has the power to determine that distribution. In the very same way, transit is fundamentally social political. It's designed by decision makers, many of them elected, and many of them appointed by elected representatives, who decide where resources flow and who gets what. Since our ZEB conference earlier this year, the tears and fear and helplessness that George Floyd and Joyce Echequan represented, in full view of us all, have been deepened in their sorrowful content and their sorrowful hue by the discovery in Canada of mass graves of hundreds of Indigenous children from residential schools, which are more properly known in this country as torture camps and death prisons for Canadian Aboriginal children. And just a few days ago in Canada, we woke up to the news of a family murdered in London, run over deliberately because they dared in this great multicultural polyglot nation of ours, to be happy, to be active, to be out for a walk, and to be Muslim while doing it. Violence against women, violence against Black people, violence against Indigenous people, violence against Muslims. This is not the country we imagine ourselves to be living in, but it is actually the country we do live in. Changing it is a social and political question, there is no doubt, and we all need to make a personal and household decision on this matter, including CUTRIC. Every day, my team and I show up to work, and every day we face the issue of how to influence the distribution of resources to better the lives of Canadians. So every day we have a role in these fundamental discussions about who owns the right to power in Canada. I truly, truly believe that public transit and shared mobility will help to save this planet and help to save humanity. Of that, there is no doubt in my mind. But I also believe that we in this industry need to accept that the death of a Black man named George Floyd, the death of an Indigenous woman named Joyce Echaquan, the death and killing of hundreds of innocent children from our Aboriginal communities, and the murder of a Muslim family in London are linked to our social systems, including and especially transit, which is the economic lifeline for so many families. My own mother used to take transit on a daily basis. I take transit on a daily basis. We all grew up taking transit on a daily basis, but my mother had to take transit on a daily basis. And she was frequently told, while on the bus, while on the LRT, to go back home, to get out of Canada, to go get back on the boat. She was spit at, she was yelled at, she had police officers tell her that drunkards they had picked up on the street for jailing were suitable sexual lovers for her. And she had all of that happen to her in Calgary, which is supposedly an apparent modern economic powerhouse of Canada. So transit needs to be safe from viruses and violence, but it also needs to look different at its leadership levels so that transit does not look and feel that way for people like my mother. Our transit systems are missing women in leadership. They are missing Black women and Black men as CEOs. They are missing Indigenous women and Indigenous men as CEOs, and they're missing Muslim women and Muslim men as CEOs. So our transit systems are without doubt missing great people in action. And Canadian transit should be great. It should be a world leader in all cities, in all cases. It should be the model that others follow, because I do believe with our community and our citizenry, Canadian transit should be reflective of nearly every nation in the world. It's not today, but I believe it can be. And I believe we can achieve these goals. I believe that it can be thus. And that's why throughout this conference, you will be invited to participate in CUTRIC's first ever gender survey of transit leadership. Over the next year, we're going to be expanding it to include a survey of racial representation in transit leadership as well. We definitely have a lot of work ahead. We have our work cut out for us. But we can change our transit system to make it the envy of the world so that the next woman who boards a bus in Calgary and is just trying to get to work does not get spit on and told to go home. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague Magali Frenette, who leads our operations in Quebec.
Bonjour tout le monde, mon nom est Magali Frenette, je suis la responsable de la réussite des membres du Québec pour le CUTRIC. Bienvenue. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour notre troisième conférence sur les technologies de mobilité intelligente à faible émission de carbone. Comme le disait Yospa, alors que le Canada est en deuil des vies perdues dans les pensionnats autochtones, en plus de la récente attaque terroriste visant une famille musulmane à London, en Ontario, j'aimerais prendre quelques instants pour reconnaître le rôle essentiel que doivent jouer la justice et la réconciliation, de pair avec la diversité et l'inclusion, alors qu'on travaille à façonner l'avenir du Canada. L'endroit dont je vous parle aujourd'hui abrite de nombreuses Premières Nations, de même que les Hurons-Wendat, les Métis et les Inuits. Et prendre acte de cette réalité nous rappelle que le niveau de vie enviable dont nous jouissons aujourd'hui est directement relié aux ressources et à l'amitié des peuples autochtones. Je tiens à remercier particulièrement notre commanditaire exclusif ABB, notre commanditaire platine comme Ballard Power System et le groupe NFI, nos commanditaires or comme Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Proterra, Zev Clean Cloud, nos commanditaires argent, Enbridge, Novabus et Thales, notre commanditaire bronze, Siemens, ainsi que nos commanditaires des médias, soit Driving.ca et Énergie Média.
CUTRIC's entire history is one of forming a community to build a better life for Canadians. Our consortium has grown from 6 founding members in 2015 to over 150 corporate, academic, and institutional members today. It's true that we just wouldn't exist if people didn't want to improve the transit system and mobility for all Canadians. And among those supporters is our list of avid sponsors who have evolved into truly a who's who of low carbon smart mobility, innovation, and expertise in Canada. So I'd like to take a moment to thank our exclusive sponsor, ABB, our platinum sponsors, Ballard Power Systems and New Flyer Industries Group, our gold sponsors, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Proterra, and Zev Clean Power, our silver sponsors, Enbridge, Novabus, and Thales, our bronze sponsors, Siemens, and our media sponsors, Driving.ca and Energy Media, for helping us to build this better nation. Globally, if we did not believe in a better transit and mobility future, we wouldn't be here with you today. My team wouldn't be here, our consortium wouldn't be here, but we have been growing and growing strong. And I know that you are aware by participating in this conference that not only do we have a lot to do, but we have a lot of the solutions to get us to that future we want. So I know for certain that our speaker for the opening address for CUTRIC's 3rd annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Conference definitely believes these things too. It's my pleasure now to welcome the first female member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre, Canada's first ever Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and now the first woman to be named Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. This Canadian knows all about blazing trails. Please welcome the Honourable Catherine McKenna.
Well, Josepha, thank you so much. It's been great to work with you personally. I know what a huge champion you are for public transit, but also zero emission buses and more broadly, low carbon smart mobility, which is what we're talking about today. I really wish I could join you live. Unfortunately, that didn't work. So the good news is we have technology, and I'm just really happy to be joining you. Look, I don't need to tell you folks what a challenging year we've had. It's shaped so many aspects of our lives, and it's had such a huge impact on people in our communities. Of course, our number one focus as a government has been on helping Canadians get through the pandemic, focused on their health and safety, as well as supporting them economically. But look, the good news is I think we can see the other side, and we will get through the pandemic. But as we return to normal, our communities will need better, effective public transit, clean public transit, for the same reason as before. We need to protect the environment, tackle climate change. We need to help commuters get to and from work quickly. We need to prevent gridlock on our roads. And since 2015, we have invested over $25 billion, a huge amount, in more than 1,300 public transit projects across Canada. These investments have built more than 240 kilometers of new public transit subway and light rail lines, purchased over 300 electric buses, and create almost 500 kilometers of active transportation, trails, bikes, and pedestrian lanes, as well as recreation paths. Avec le retour à la normale, nos collectivités auront besoin de réseaux de transport en commun efficaces pour les mêmes raisons qu'avant. Pour protéger l'environnement et attaquer au changement climatique, pour éviter les embouteillages sur nos routes et pour aider les gens à se déplacer de manière sûre et efficace. Depuis 2015, nous avons investi plus de 25 milliards de dollars dans plus de 300 300 projets de transport en commun au Canada. Ces investissements ont permis de construire plus de 240 kilomètres de nouvelles lignes de métro et de trains légers, d'acheter plus de 300 autobus électriques et de créer près de 500 kilomètres de sentiers de transport actifs, de voies cyclables et piétonnes et de sentiers récréatifs. And that's just the beginning. In February, the Prime Minister and I announced nearly $15 billion for new public transit infrastructure projects over the next 8 years. with a permanent $3 billion annually starting in 26-27. As part of that, in March, I announced a $2.75 billion investment in zero-emission buses and other transit projects to help electrify Canada's public transit system, as well as a dedicated rural transit fund and an active transportation fund. All of our investments are complemented by the Canada Infrastructure Bank's mandate to invest at least $5 billion in public transit, as well as a dedicated rural transit fund and active transportation fund. But we know public transit is critical for our communities, and people will be back riding it. It's critical for getting people where they need to go quickly, safely, efficiently, in clean ways. And it's critical for the most vulnerable in our communities who rely on public transit. That's particularly women, youth, seniors, new immigrants, and essential workers who continue to support all of us through the pandemic. And it's critical for building cleaner communities. As leaders in low carbon mobility, you know full well that we can't get to net zero without addressing transportation. It accounts for a quarter of our emissions. So we have a real opportunity to tackle climate change by investing in faster, cleaner, cheaper public transit options. We're committed to delivering on our promise to purchase 5,000 zero-emission buses, school and transit buses, as well as charging infrastructure as we reach net zero by 2050. From our once-in-a-generation investment of $1.7 billion towards Hamilton's LRT project and $10.4 billion towards public transit projects in the GTA, to electric buses in Vancouver, Guelph, Brampton, and Ottawa, and beyond. And great shout out to Ottawa, who just announced they will electrify their entire fleet by 2036. That's 450 buses, the first city to do so. We're ensuring that Canadians have access to clean transportation options like zero-emission public transit. This is a critical part of our plan to build cleaner, healthier communities. And Canada is a world leader in transit manufacturing, with automotive sector workers, with electric bus workers in Winnipeg, as well as workers in Thunder Bay, Kingston, Saint-Eustache, and Saint-Jérôme, producing some of the world's best subways, buses, and LRTs. On transit, we have a great story to tell. Better public transit, cleaner air, quieter streets, and a planet safe for our kids. That's the goal of our investment in zero-emission buses across Canada. C'est un élément important de notre plan qui consiste à créer des collectivités plus propres et plus saines. Le Canada est un chef de file mondial dans la fabrication de matériel de transport en commun. Nous avons une très belle histoire à raconter. Des meilleurs réseaux de transport en commun, de l'air plus pur, des rues plus silencieuses et une planète plus sûre pour nos enfants. Voilà l'objectif de notre investissement dans des autobus à zéro émission dans tout le Canada. By making these investments and working collaboratively with valued partners and stakeholders like CUTRIC, we're tackling climate change while creating good jobs, getting cars off the road, getting people to their workplaces and to schools more quickly, and supporting inclusive, resilient communities. Together, we're working to conquer COVID, to protect lives, to support families, individuals, and businesses across the country, and of course, to build back better. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Minister. We really appreciate your time. We know that you're pressed for time, and if we can ask you just one concluding question. You've done so much. There's a lot of money going into the industry. It's transforming the economy. It's really making people wake up. And from buses to LRT to subway, you're just building more transit. That is the truth of the matter. If we were to ask you, looking back at your record in the last couple of years and looking forward, what is the big success that you would identify in terms of what you personally think a huge successful outcome for Canadian transportation looks like in the future?
Look, I'm going to actually put it in people terms because I think that's really what's important. We have been through a really traumatic time. I think that the pandemic has been extremely hard on people's physical health, on their mental health. It's been very hard on workers, on businesses. And I think if one thing comes out of this, it'll be in 20 years from now, you'll have maybe a dad and his daughter riding an electric bus or a subway line extension or a new LRT, maybe not new then. And the daughter asks their dad, how did we get here? And the dad says, well, you wouldn't believe it, but we had this terrible pandemic. Everyone had to stay at home. Kids couldn't go to school. People died, but we had vision. And we decided to invest a lot of money so we could create jobs, but also so we could tackle climate change and build amazing public transit. So that's my hope that this is really about improving lives for real people, because we all cared. We all came together working with CUTRIC, but all the partners that I'm sure are part of the conference and politicians, and had vision and made the investments that were critically needed in public transit, including ongoing funding for public transit, but really having a vision for the future we wanted. And we did it. So that's what my hope is. I'm working very hard on that. We are making historic investments in public transit, but that's really investments in people. You have told the story of your mother taking a new immigrant, taking a number of buses, maybe even a train to get to work, traveling very long hours to get to and from work so she could provide for you. And those are the people who use our transit, and that is about improving people's lives. So that's why I got into this business. Also, there's a great economic story because we manufacture a lot of these zero emission technology right here in Canada. So creating good jobs and opportunities for businesses. And of course, at the end of the day, we got to tackle climate change, and this is a key part of it.
Minister, your vision is entirely apropos, and we fully agree with where the government's going. At some point, families will look back in future and say, why did we ever live the way we lived before with the kind of transportation system we had? So we really support it. And, in light of what just happened in London and the horrible tragedy there, I can tell you that not only did my mother take LRT and buses to get to work and earn a paycheck, but she also had spit thrown at her and told she was a deportee and a DP to go home. And, on the LRT, on the bus, a lot of racist acts all the way back multiple generations ago or multiple decades ago. We're still battling that. And I think with your leadership and certainly the investments you've been making, it's going to be greener, cleaner, faster, cheaper, and safer for Canadians. So we thank you for your effort. We thank you for your work, and we thank you for transforming the economy into the kind of future that we all want to live and work in. Thank you again, Minister McKenna.
Thank you. And everyone, I hope you have a great conference. Bye-bye.